Welcome back to the Dalitalks show. My name is Dali, and I created this podcast to provide you with the knowledge that you probably don't know that you need. So I invite special guests on who have something to share with you. And today I invited my dear friend, Amy, who is a teacher, and she specializes in special education and neurodivergent children. So without further ado, here's Amy. Welcome, Amy. How are you?
Hi, thank you so much, Dali. I'm so excited to be here. I'm great. You might be hearing I've got a little cockatiel and some finches. So you might be hearing those friends. But yeah, I'm really great. So thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. So Amy and I, let me tell you a backstory of like how we met. Our dear friend,
Kim
De Silva, who lives in Trinidad, Tobago, connected us. I remember she reached out and she said, "Hey, Dali, I think you would love to meet this teacher. This is what she specialized in." And we met that one time, and I immediately wanted to invite you to the podcast. And I thought I did. And for some reason, this whole time, I thought we just never got around to it. But recently you shared that we did record.
We did. Yeah, we did. It's the lost tape. You can find it and then re-release it as like a super fan episode.
Yeah, we'll see. Yes, hopefully I find it. But what's interesting about this relationship is that we immediately became friends, and then you said two things. You said, "Let's be BFFs." And I was like, yes. And you also said, "Let's create a course together." So do you remember that part? Do you want to take it from there?
Yeah. So yeah, we were just chatting and I was like, oh my God, we have to build this course. We have to do it because like, this is knowledge that everyone needs to have. And we have to we complete each other. You complete me, Dali.
You complete me, Amy.
Like our set of lived experiences is like the other half of each other. So we like have a really great just in terms of our lived experiences, in terms of our skill sets and our work experience is like kind of the opposite of each other. And that's really great to be able to provide both sides of this conversation.
Yeah. So tell our audience more about who you are. How did you get into teaching? Tell us more.
Oh, and I think we forgot to talk about the name of the course. The course is called Confident Bully Proof Kids. And we are both passionate about bullying prevention, not just responding to it, but preventing it altogether. So, which is an extreme passion of mine as a teacher. I am a classroom teacher of 10 plus years. I'm currently a certificated teacher in my province where I live in Canada. I'm actually, just as I record this, I'm going to finish and then I'm going to head out to teaching. And social stuff is complex and it's hard. I got diagnosed with autism well into my adulthood. So I'm a very late diagnosed neurodivergent. I had always kind of, floated around with different people, kind of thought of different mental health diagnoses, but nothing really I didn't really fit the profile of anything. And it just, people just kind of went, shrug, whatever, you're weird, you'll figure it out. And which is not tremendous. Anyway, so I got diagnosed later. And then that kind of made a lot of things fit in my brain in terms of the way I understand the world and the way I understand myself and the way I understand parenting. So I am myself, I'm autistic. I have a neurodivergent child, like my own child. And I also have a neurotypical child. So I've got one of each. And I've taught special ed for a lot of years. And so I've got kind of that 360 neurodivergent kind of life going on.
Okay, so let's start with describing what neurodivergent is.
Yeah, so neurotype. It's been it's a fairly new set of vocabulary. And so if you haven't heard about it, or if you're not super comfortable with it, that's okay. It's fairly new. And so neuro means kind of brain and nervous system. So neurotype is just like the type of brain that you have. So I'll back up a little bit. The way the DSM, so the Diagnostic and Statistics Manual for generally used in the US, North America, some other places, to diagnose kind of mental illnesses, mental disorders. Autism and ADHD and some of the other ones, those are kind of the main ones that I'm like the most familiar with. So I don't really want to speak too far out of my familiarity, but that's so autism, the full name of autism is autism spectrum disorder. ADHD is attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So here's the thing, is that I am a disordered human, according to the DSM. I have a disorder in my brain, which is incurable. It's an incurably disordered brain. And that's a problem in terms of the way we think about people's brains, because I don't have a disordered brain. I just have a different brain from what people think my brain should be. And I would say the problem with that is that you think my brain should be a certain way, not that my brain is the way it is. There's no problem with my brain being the way it is. So this conversation around terms like neurodivergent and neurotypical is in response largely to this sort of ableist language of being disordered. So the idea being that no brain is right or wrong. It just is what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. You mentioned earlier that you have a neurodivergent child and you have a neurodivergent typical.
I have a neurotypical. So neurodivergent. So neurotypical is what people would call normal. So this like normal, brain. Within this sort of linguistic framework of neurotype would be called neurotypical. And I have one of those. And then neurodivergent, basically they're sort of opposites, right? So anything that's not neurotypical is neurodivergent. And it was built to be inclusive of all different types of brains. So people with autism, ADHD, dyslexia, mental illness, all sorts of things. It was meant to be an inclusive term rather than an exclusive term.
Okay.
Does that help?
Yes, that helps a lot. And I have to, this is not the first or third or fifth time I ask you that. Because
no, I think it's great.
Yeah, because I want to be able to make sure that I'm using the right term and that I understand it properly. And I know that it's still not as common as it should be. And we're starting to hear this language at schools. And I think that when it comes to having a parent say who asks for a IEP, if their child is struggling and they think there might be something there. I don't want parents to be scared of the term because it sounds a little intimidating. And very mysterious. And when we know nothing about something, we tend to, create a whole story in our head about mostly how bad it could be instead of how good and wonderful it could be. Right. And
so the first
before you continue, I just want to say one of the things that I love that you showed me is, and you're not the only one, that once you were diagnosed, instead of seeing it as oh man, that sucks, you saw it as like, yay, this is awesome. This explains how I've been feeling and the differences that I noticed in myself. So you use it to empower yourself, and you use it to try different strategies to try to, work with whatever gets you frustrated because you do things differently.
Yeah, absolutely. And for parents, if they are stressed about the whole idea of brains and school and IEPs and accommodations and all of this, is just my first step for those parents is just to say, pause and back up. Your child is your child, and you know your child. And whatever any expert does or doesn't think, your child fits into in terms of a diagnostic criteria, that is what it is. Your child is your child, and you are the parent that your child needs. And all of these pieces will fall into place in time. The first question really to ask is my child struggling right now? And then if the answer is yes, or like it seems like they might be, interrogate that. Like, be curious about that. What are they struggling with? What are the challenges? Because I get sometimes people ask me like, well, I think my child has ADHD, or I think they're autistic. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, how are they doing? You know, how are they doing? How are things going? How are they doing socially? How are they doing academically? What do their teachers report in terms of how they are acting in class? Are they coming in ready to learn? Are they engaging with the classroom lessons? And I guess the social piece, I'll come back to the social piece, but those would be the first set of questions. And then if it seems like everything is going okay, then you can ask your kid, like, how do you feel about school? Do you feel like you are part of the group? Do you feel like you're keeping up with what's going on? Do you feel like you understand what's expected of you? And those to me are the more important questions than what neurotype is my child.
So what I hear you saying is that we should ask the child these questions to see if they have an inkling, because that might be a clue to maybe needing to get them tested. And I like that you're giving like certain specific examples, because as a teacher, I'm sure that you see certain things stand out more than others. So as a teacher, if you notice something, and this can be a very delicate thing because this is still very much stigmatized, what would you ask parents to do or understand if a teacher suggests that there might be need for testing?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say to the parent to do is talk to their kid. Everything needs to go through the lens of your child's experience of this. So their teacher notices, say you get a call from a teacher that says, I noticed they're, inattentive in class, or I noticed they struggle to get themselves ready for learning, or I noticed they're chatting with their friends, or whatever the teacher says. I would then take that information, thank you so much. I'll we'll follow up. We'll keep having this conversation, right? We'll just keep going. It's not a one and done. We're just going to thank you so much for bringing this into the landscape, and we will just kind of keep talking about it. We'll interrogate, we'll be curious, and we'll just keep having these conversations. So then I would take that, and I wouldn't even and honestly, my best advice for parents just in general is to start conversations with your child being curious, not just related to this, but just related to anything. Don't start with, well, so-and-so says blah, blah, blah. Start with, tell me how school's going. How do you feel like, do you feel like you understand when a teacher gives you instructions? Do you feel confident? How confident do you feel that you understand what is being asked of you in school? How confident do you feel that you're doing a good job at your schoolwork? These kinds of questions, and then they would say, yes or no, and then you can probe further, like, oh, tell me why or why not, no, I don't feel like I really understand. Okay, do you feel like, why don't you understand? Like, what do you think is getting in the way of you understanding? And just ask lots and lots of open-ended questions in a with a non-judgmental tone of voice and using non-judgmental language. And then so once you've had a few opportunities for this kind of probing, this curiosity with the child, then you can start bringing in some of that, oh, well, your teacher is wondering if maybe it's tough for you sometimes to be able to understand the instructions. What do you think of that? So anytime you give a child information, you always want to ask them, okay, tell me, what are your thoughts about that? That's pay dirt. That's where you get that really rich information from the child. And that's where you will be able to figure out like what's going on inside their brain. What are they experiencing of stuff? Because really, if a child, like all we see as other people, like as outsiders, is we just see someone's behavior. We can't see what's going on inside their brains. All we can see is their behavior. And we sometimes, I think as adults, we sometimes make assumptions about their either their motivations or their like their brain realities based on their behavior. And I would encourage people to not do that. To start with that curiosity and to like, tell me what's going on. Like, let's walk it through, you know, even you can role play it, right? Like, okay, you're sitting in your desk, who's sitting here, who's sitting here, you know, okay. So if you kind of are here, like the teacher gives you an instruction, what's happening in your brain. Okay, the window's open, you hear a bird outside, you know, there's a fan over here. Like find what are the pieces that are, you know, that come out from these conversations in terms of that child's experience.
You've given us a lot of great information here. So is there, I know that every condition or every disorder.
Yeah, like different neurotypes or different like neurostatus, yeah.
So I'm wondering though, is there like a certain sign that you see first or more of, say, whether it's like challenges in academics or challenges in behavior, or it's just, it could be either or?
Yeah, it's gonna be super, like be super variable depending on the situation, depending on just all sorts of different things. I would say the thing that I like to see in children that shows me they're doing okay. And here's the thing, is like neurotypical children also struggle in school sometimes too. Neurodivergent children sometimes don't struggle in school at all. Sometimes neurodivergent kiddos love being at school and it's their favorite place because it's structured and they know what to do and they just like thrive. So it doesn't necessarily, if they're struggling, doesn't necessarily mean they're neurodivergent. It might just be some other stuff that's happening, you know. It might be that they're not getting good sleeps, or, you know, that they have like an underlying medical condition, or who knows, right? There's a whole bunch of reasons. Or they're experiencing bullying, as we talk about a lot in our course. So that's why it's really important to get that child's perspective of what's going on with them. And do they perceive, so and this is the other piece I want parents to understand too. If generally speaking, if a child is struggling either with academics or with social stuff, they usually know that. Sometimes we're scared to like mention it to children because it's like, we don't want to label them or we don't want to like embarrass them or whatever. And that's why we don't start with judgment. We don't start with a, you know, a label or saying, you know, you're doing a bad job at this or whatever, right? We start with curiosity. We start with openness. But the chances are, if your child is struggling academically, I have never met a child that is struggling academically that didn't know they were struggling academically. And if a child is struggling academically, it's very important that we unpack that with the child. What's going on?
So what advice would you give a parent if they have a child who is special education, and they're worried about the type of teacher that they might have? What are some questions that they should be asking of that teacher to make sure that that teacher is the right fit for that child and that child is the right fit for that teacher? Because it does go both ways.
Oh, good question. I would say it's definitely worth it to invest in a relationship with the teacher, get to know them. What kind of questions? I would say just start out with like just get their vibe. I know that's not like a very official answer. Like, what's their vibe? What's their jam? Do they seem overly strict or like overly rule focused, or are they able to be like relaxed? To me, I would actually say there's a lot more, what would we call it? Communication, like nonverbal communication. That's to me what I would look for a lot in a special ed teacher, is like, are they giving nonverbal cues that they're relaxed and that they are confident and that they can manage these challenging moments. So yeah, I guess I would think about it as more of like a vibe check rather than specific questions.
I like that you said the vibe check, because I think that people don't see it that way sometimes. Sometimes they ask more of the professional questions.
Yeah.
But when you're trying to make sure that your child is gonna get along well and work well with that teacher, you do have to vibe, and I think most people don't ever think about that.
In terms of tools for like a relationship between a special ed teacher and the parents, I would actually say a collaborative approach is always, always, always better. And I would work with, I don't know, it depends on how the school is structured, I feel like, because different schools will have different like levels for like parents to engage with. For me, as a teacher, I would have a very collaborative relationship with parents. So we would be talking about, because chances are a lot of the behavioral challenges that I see in my classroom with that child are also exhibited at home. And if they're not, then that really gives us some very interesting information. If we're seeing different sets of behavior, then that's also very curious. So I would suggest to parents that the best thing you can do if you have a special ed teacher or like a specialized setting for your kiddo is really to be collaborative with that teacher. Because if we don't see the same behaviors, that tells us something also about that child. And that helps us to be able to understand how we can better support that child as well. If we are seeing the same behaviors, we can use the same approaches. And it's always great to say, okay, well, here's how we've been dealing with it. How have you been dealing with it? Do we want to like match our approaches so that this, the child can level up and like rise over this challenge quicker, right? It's always better the more consistency we can have between home and school. And that's going to really create a lot more growth in that child when they see their parents and their teacher have the same expectations for them and are using the same supports and systems. I would, as a teacher, I would provide my parents with a lot of social stories for things that happen at home as well as what happened at school. So I would actually, and if you want to chat with me about that, I can, I can talk further. But yeah, I would be as a teacher, I would be providing my parents with lots of supports and like visuals and stuff like that to use at home. And depending on what the vibe is, what the relationship is between you and the school and you and the teacher, that might be something you can explore. But I really want parents to understand the teacher is not here to judge your parenting. And if it sounds like, if it comes across like the teacher is judging your parenting, part of that is going to be to examine your filter a little bit. I know being a special needs parent is hard, and I know that because I am one. It's really tough, and you have a very tough job. And it is easy to feel like you are being criticized. And I want you to know you're doing okay. You're doing a fine job. And it's important that you kind of can allow yourself to be a little bit vulnerable with the people that are here to provide supports, if you feel comfortable doing so. And that's why I kind of start with wanting a vibe check and wanting to kind of get a sense of that person as a person so that you can feel comfortable to have these vulnerable moments and say, you know what, this is something I'm really struggling with as a parent. I'm wondering if you have any advice or if you see something similar in the classroom. It's really to everyone's benefit when teachers and parents can work together. Yeah, the end.
Thank you. So last question, because one of the things you told me when we met is that you're a parenting coach. And so can you tell us a little bit about how it is that you work with parents and how they can reach you?
Yeah, absolutely. You can reach me through my website and you can book a free 30-minute meeting. I'm also available on Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, if you want to check me out and just like do a vibe check on me and see kind of like what's my jam. But But yeah, you can book a meeting with me. My goal for every meeting, every 30-minute meeting with a parent, is that you'll be able to walk away with one tool you can use the second you hang up.
I love
So
that.
one affirmation that you're doing okay, one thing you're doing really great at, and one thing you can use as soon as you leave the meeting. We're not about doing fancy this and that and making all these really elaborate schemes, because this is all happening in real time and we got stuff to do in our lives. And so we just bring it back to basics. We just remember what we're doing here. And sometimes having someone else kind of reflect that back is helpful. I get parents who are like concerned about, their child's development or that sort of thing. And I think sometimes they're nervous to go to like a diagnostician or that sort of thing because they're worried about what's going to happen. So those are also conversations that I have, recognizing I'm not a diagnostician or a doctor, psychologist, any of those things. I'm a teacher and a parent, and that's my expertise. But sometimes people, want a little bit of talking down from where they're at. And generally speaking, just to remember that you know your child, and remember that the people who make the diagnostic criteria for stuff are a bunch of dudes in lab coats. And they, like, to some extent, there is like an arbitrariness to the diagnostic criteria, which is why it's constantly changing. Because as people learn more about these different neurotypes, then they go, oh, wait a minute, this actually is this, and this goes here, and maybe we should stop having this, Stuff is changing, and it's important that we be critical of the kind of power dynamics that are involved in diagnosing, especially children. And we keep that in mind. Diagnosing, like a diagnosis, can be a liberating piece for both the child and the parent. And it can allow for more access to things like funding and extra supports and things like IEPs and accommodations and that sort of stuff under the ADA. So there are like beneficial pieces to it, and it's all a journey. But just don't forget that you are the parent your child needs, and that it's just going to be 1 minute at a time, 1 hour at a time, 1 day at a time, and you don't have to worry about 17 steps down the road. You can just be here. And that a lot of, especially parents of young children that are having a lot of meltdowns, a lot of this will get better naturally with age and with development. Just be present, help them build strategies, and just go from there.
Thank you. And what's the name of your website?
Oh, yes. Building Stronger Relationships. So my business is Building Stronger Relationships. My website is buildingstrongerrelationships.com. If you are interested in our bully-proof course, buildingstrongerrelationships.com/bullyproofkids. And on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, I'm at Building Stronger Relationships. If you want to email me, info@buildingstrongerrelationships. And let's do it. It's going to be okay. And you're doing just fine.
Great. Thank you, Amy. Thank you so much for sharing all of this wealth of knowledge with my audience, and also for just being an amazing teacher and human and friend.
Thank you so much, Dali. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, I hope that you took away a lot of information from this conversation with Amy. Please don't forget to check her out. And if you have any questions, really do DM her or email her, because she does respond. She thrives on this. Every time she gets a question from a parent, she loves it, just like I do. That's what parenting coaches, we love the questions, because that's what challenges us, and it makes us just feel like, hey, it's a reminder that we are needed and that people do appreciate our help. So if you have not subscribed to this podcast yet, please do that now, whether you're listening to this episode on YouTube or Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that you're listening. Thanks again for watching or for listening, and until next time.
Hey, did you like that episode? If you did, be sure to subscribe to this podcast wherever you may be listening and write a review. If you want more tips or some behind the scenes videos, make sure to follow my mom at Dalitalks on Instagram. You can turn on notifications for her posts and stories as well. Thank you so much for listening to this podcast. See you next time.